Looking at the story of Joseph that we have in the book of Genesis gives us an opportunity to see some things that are very significant in terms of the way the Bible was put together, the way it was constructed in the form that we have it when we have our own form of the Bible. And there is another thing that I brought up one time before, and that is that several times in the story of Joseph, we get an indication that these things happened the way they happened because God had ordained them. And get into this discussion again about what we mean by free will, and the fact that do we have free will. Now, if you wonder what that means, think about it for a couple of months. What it does mean to say that you have the free will to choose what you wish to do. What I plan to do right now, however, is to take a look at, now, just to review some rather quickly. Review rather quickly some of the things that we were doing the last week or so, looking at the story of Joseph. We've looked at the first thing, and the first slide I had up there indicated that Joseph was born rather late in the life of Jacob. But one of the things that was significant about Joseph is that being born after 10 sons, Joseph comes along, and the 10 sons were never with Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, but Joseph was. And Joseph became sort of a favorite of Jacob. Now, very quickly, what we find out is that Joseph was able to anger and irritate his brothers by telling them about dreams that he had that indicated that someday they would be worshiping him. Even his father and mother would be worshiping him sometime in the future. What they decided to do is do away with him. They were going to throw him in a pit, and ended up selling him to some itinerant slave people. And he ended up being sold into slavery. You see Joseph being led away. And his brothers went back and told their father that Joseph had been killed by some wild beast. In the meantime, Joseph was sold as a slave to Potiphar, who was an Egyptian official, and he became very important in Potiphar's household. You'll notice in the background this woman, that's Potiphar's wife. She noticed Joseph also. As a matter of fact, she had a very strong longing for him, and we have several instances where Potiphar's wife was trying to seduce Joseph. He wouldn't go along with it, but she accused him of doing it, of trying to seduce her, and as a consequence, he was thrown into prison. And while he was in prison, he happened to run into a couple of prisoners who had dreams, and he interpreted the dreams for these prisoners. One of them was the butler, who dreamt he saw 3 vines with grapes, and he was told that he was the king's butler, but he had been accused of conspiring against the king, but he would be restored to his position in 3 days. The other was the baker, who also had conspired supposedly against the Pharaoh, but in his dream, the birds were taking the bread out of his basket, and it meant that he would be hung in 3 days. Well, it turned out that the butler went back as the wine steward for the Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh had a dream, and he had several dreams, and everybody pondered over what those dreams might have been. He dreamt of the fat cows and the lean cows. He dreamt about the healthy stalks of grain, the weak stalks of grain. And finally, this butler remembered that this man that he knew in prison, this Joseph, was able to interpret dreams, and so Joseph was called to interpret the dreams. And he did interpret the dreams, and he told the Pharaoh that what was going to happen is that what he saw in those dreams with the fat and the lean cows and the stalks of grain is that there would be 7 years where there would be bountiful crops, and that would be followed by 7 years of famine. And the thing that Joseph said, the thing that you should do now, Pharaoh, is appoint somebody to see to it that during those 7 years you store up enough grain and food for those 7 years that it will follow in famine. Pharaoh thought that was a good idea. Where do I find such a man? And decided to choose Joseph himself. As here we find Pharaoh putting the ring on Joseph's hand and saying, "You are now his second in command in my region here." And we see Joseph riding around in a carriage in this fashion. He also was married off to the princess. Actually, she was the daughter of one of the priests. And so all of a sudden, Joseph finds himself also a part of the royalty of that kingdom. In the meantime, he starts working at the business of being in charge of gathering up enough during those plentiful years that it can be stored and they can be used later on. Here we see Joseph acting as the overseer, getting the grain stored in that fashion. Then we are told in the last verse of that particular chapter also that Joseph had two sons with that princess that he had married. The two sons are going to play a rather significant role a little bit later on. Now we get into some new material. Let's just think about this in terms of the plot, the way the thing was set up. This boy, Joseph, is sold into slavery by his brothers. His brothers do not know what happened to him. It's just that he was carted away. What happens now is that there is a famine. There is plenty of food in Egypt, but there are other places that are having a lot of problems. And what we find in the next slide is that Jacob calls the brothers together, the other 10 brothers, and said, "I guess you'll have to go to Egypt to get some food." Now, this is what I printed up. We're going to read some of this. The reason we're going to read a lot of this is because of the fact that this is some of the greatest literature. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy, among others, who came before the famine was severe in the land of Canaan. Now think about this. These brothers do not know that Joseph is alive, and there's going to be a confrontation between Joseph and these brothers. It takes a couple of chapters to do it, because here we get, I think, some of the more interesting, what you might say, storytelling that you'll find anywhere, not only in the Bible, but anywhere in literature. How is Joseph going to handle this? Let's look at the next slide. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He it was who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and knew them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So thus Joseph knew his brothers, but they did not know him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness of the land." And they said to him, "No, my lord, but to buy food have your servants come. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men, your servants, and not spies." And he said to them, "No, it is the weakness of the land that you have come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with his father, and one is no more." They did not know what had happened to Joseph. But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies, and by this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you to let him bring your brother while you remain in prison. that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. But they put them all together, and he put them all together in the prison for 3 days. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack and give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. And they loaded their asses with their grain and departed. And one of them opened his sack and gave his ass provender at the lodging place, and he saw the money in the mouth of the sack. And he said to his brother, my money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack. At this their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling one to another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had befallen them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land, spoke roughly to us. There they find the money, and they're telling Jacob. And when they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told them all that had befallen them, saying, the man of the Lord of the land spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. And we said to him, we are honest men, but not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain to for the famine of your household, and go your way. And bring your youngest brother to me, then I shall know that you are not spies but honest men, and will deliver you your brother, and you shall trade in the land. As they entered their sacks, and behold, every man's bundle was in his sack, then they saw their father, and saw their bundles of money. They were dismayed. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you take Benjamin. All this has come upon me. Then Reuben said to his father, slay my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. And he said, my son shall not go down you, for this brother is dead, and he only is left. If harm should befall him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow in Sheol. Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain which they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go again and buy us a little food. But Judah said to him, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. I just want to interrupt. You notice 2 different brothers come into being here. First we're told what Reuben says he'll stand by. Now all of a sudden it's Judah. Anybody have any hint as to whether this might be told? Because we're looking at 2 stories that have been put together in a single story. And one of the stories is Reuben, and the other story is Judah. And in the future, we're going to talk about how this comes about when we get to our Bible. And Judah said to him, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send your brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you do not send them, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Why did you treat me so ill to tell the man that you had another brother? Israel said. In other words, Jacob said, why did you let him know that you had a brother? They replied, the man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? What we told him was the answer to these questions. Could we in any way know what he would say, bring your brother down? In other words, Joseph knew exactly what he was doing, but the brothers had no idea what was happening. And Judah said to his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand you shall require of him. If I do not bring him back to you, set him before you then let me bear the blame forever. If we have not delayed, we would have been returned twice." In other words, waited so long, they could have gone there 2 times. Then their father said to them, "It must be so. Then do this, take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags, and carry them down a present, like a little balm, a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight." "Take also your brother, and arise, and go to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, that he may send you back your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." So the men took the presents, and they took double the money with them and Benjamin, and they arose and went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of the house, "Bring the men into my house, and slaughter an animal, and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph bade him, and brought the men to Joseph's house. And the men were afraid, because they were brought to Joseph's house, and said, "It is because of the money which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that we may seek occasion, that he may seek occasion against us, and fall upon us to make us slaves and seize our asses." So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house. "O my lord, we came down the first time to buy food, but when we came to the lodging, we opened our sacks, and there was every man's money in the sack." In full weight, so we have brought it again with us. And we have brought other money down in your hand to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." He replied, "Rest assured, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your fathers must have put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. When the man had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, and they washed their feet, and when he had given them their asses' provender, they made ready the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that he would eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present which they had with them, and bowed down to the ground. And he inquired of their welfare, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke of, is he still alive? Your servant is well, he is still alive." And they bowed their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw his brother Benjamin and his mother's son. And he said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph made haste, for his heart yearned for his brothers, and he sought for a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, let food be served. They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because Egyptians did not eat bread with Hebrews, for that was an abomination to the Hebrews. And as they sat before them, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, and Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. This is the picture that I wanted to have up there. They were suspicious something was going on here. Why? Because when they were seated at the table, they were seated according to their age. Now, who could possibly know the age of these people? Well, Joseph did, but he did not let them know that he was Joseph. But what do you think went through their minds? What's going on here? What does this man know about us? What do they know about us and our family? So they had that meal. Go to chapter 44. Then he commanded the steward of the house, fill the men's sacks with food. Now look at this very carefully. Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of the sack, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain. And they did as Joseph told him. You'll notice that one picture, you see the cup being put into the sack of Benjamin. Why in Benjamin's sack? Well, what do you see going on here? Joseph is playing them for everything he can. He is getting his vengeance in a rather interesting fashion. I would have had all this if we had a computer working. See the silver cup being put in there. And as soon as the morning was light, the men were sent on their way with their asses. When they had gone but a short distance from the city, Joseph said to his servant, up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say, why have you returned evil for good? Why have you stolen my silver cup? Is it not from this that the Lord drinks, and by this that he divines? You have done wrong in so doing. When he overtook them, he spoke to them these words, and they said, why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants that they should do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks has been brought to you from the land of Canaan. How could we then steal silver or gold from your household? With whoever your servant is found, let him die, and we also will be the Lord's slaves. In other words, they are making the pronouncement themselves. If you find the cup, whoever stole the cup, let him die. Guess what you know as a reader? The cup is in Benjamin's sack. And he said, let it be as you say. He with whom the cup is found shall be my slave, and the rest of you shall be blameless. Then every man quickly lowered his sack to the ground, and every man opened his sack. And he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, and every man loaded his ass, and they returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell before him. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that such a man as I can indeed divine? And Joseph said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? And how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. And behold, we are your Lord's slaves, both we and also in whose hand the cup is found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose cup was found shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father. Then Judah went up to him and said, O my Lord, let your servant pray you. Let your servant, I pray you, speak a word in my Lord's ear, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servants, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a young brother, a child of old age, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then he said to his servants, bring him to me, that I may set my eyes upon him. I set my eyes upon him. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for he should leave his father. If he should leave his father would die. Then he said to his servants, unless your younger brother comes down to you, well, they found the cup. Then we get a section where after they found the cup, Judah pleads for Joseph, pleads to Joseph to spare his brother, to spare him because he is his father's only son. And then we move on to chapter 45 finally. After Joseph had listened to the plea that had come from Judah, and again we find Judah's name prominent here, we are told in chapter 45, then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, make everyone go out from me. Make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him. And when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud. So all the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brother, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me. I got several pictures of Joseph weeping and being with his brothers, let himself be known to his brothers. There he is with meeting his brother Benjamin, hugging Benjamin. These are all pictures. I want to just take a second here to say something, and that is that there are a lot of paintings that have been made over the years, and it's kind of surprising that every once in a while you find a painting that is repeated different times by different people or an event. There's some action in it. Most of the stuff that I find on the internet are portraits of people. They are not that interesting. But I find out when there is some event taking place, the artists seem to like that. With the revelation of Joseph to his brother, that he was their brother that they had sold into slavery, we get a lot of pictures. I think I have mentioned this before. There are other places where you can find many, many pictures because of the event that is taking place that's recorded in the Bible. One of them is way back in the story of Abraham when he sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert. You ought to know how many different pictures I can find of Abraham sending Joseph out. I think I've mentioned this before. There's another place where we find very, very many pictures, and that's Potiphar's wife chasing Joseph. I found many of those. Where there seems to be action, the artists like to paint them. That happens to be the case here also when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Found many, many different examples of paintings that have been made of that revelation. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, and I pray you. And they came, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. Now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you have sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. That's one of those statements that we're going to come to later on. All of these things happen. Why? Because, it says, for God sent me before you to preserve life. We get some very strong indications that all of the things that we see in the stories that we're looking at right now have been planned by God. We'll have to discuss that. For the famine had been severe in the land these 2 years, and yet there are 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. Now, I'm going to stop at that point also. This is one of the first real indications that we have some indication of how many years have passed since Joseph has gotten together with those brothers. Let's go all the way back to when Joseph was sold into slavery. How old do you think Joseph was? He was probably still a boy. He may have been 16 or 17 years old. Now, why do we think he might be that old? Because I don't think Jacob would have sent him out if he were not old enough to be able to take care of himself. So he might have been about 16 or 17 years old when he was taken into slavery, brought to Egypt, sold to Potiphar, and then we find Potiphar's wife taking a liking to Joseph. Well, not when he was 17 years old, but rather Joseph must have been working for Potiphar 4 or 5 years, maybe even a little longer than that. And Joseph might have been in his early 20s when Potiphar's wife went chasing after him, and then Joseph was put into prison. How long was Joseph in prison? We don't really know how long it was before those two prisoners that were with him had these dreams. But they had their dreams. Joseph interpreted those dreams, and the butler was restored back to his position. And what is significant is that when Pharaoh had a dream, that butler remembered that Joseph had interpreted his dream 2 years before. Another 2 years passed. And then we find that Joseph interprets that dream, and then we do get a statement that's kind of interesting, a statement that says that immediately after Joseph had interpreted those dreams, he was made second in command after Pharaoh. And the statement is actually made that he was 30 years old at this time. So 30 years have passed from the time that he was taken as sold into slavery up until the time that he became what? Became the second in command and became the vice chancellor, you might say, of that part of Egypt. But now we have to take a look at the situation of Jacob's sons coming, those brothers coming. When do they come? After what? 7 years of plenty. And actually, when we read it carefully, there were 2 years more. It was in the second year of the famine. So another 7 years, another 9 years have passed. So Joseph was almost 40 years old at the time that those brothers came. Another thing that the Bible doesn't tell us, was Benjamin alive when Joseph was sold into slavery? Did Joseph know that he had a brother? Did Joseph know that Benjamin was his brother? He quizzes those brothers in such a way as to find out if he had a brother. But I think we have to conclude that probably Joseph knew that that he did have a brother, Benjamin. And Benjamin at this time would have been a boy, what? Well, he would have been about, 16, 17 years old. And that ties in pretty nicely with the pictures that we had just looked at when Benjamin and Joseph do get together. But what happens next? We find out, I want to read this verse again. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land. There we get another one of those indications. This is all God's plan. He says then, make haste and go to your father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children, and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. And there I will provide for you. For there are yet 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all you that have come to poverty. And now before your eyes see, the eyes of my brother Benjamin, see that my mouth is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell your father, my father, of all my splendor in Egypt and of all that you have seen. Make haste and bring my father down, for he fell upon Benjamin's neck and wept upon his neck. And he kissed his brothers and wept for them, and all of his brothers talked with him. And when the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers had come. It pleased Pharaoh and servants as well. So Israel took his journey, and with all that he had, he came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob, here am I. Then he said, I am God, the God of your fathers. Do not be afraid to go to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation. I will go with you to Egypt and will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. And Joseph will be there when you die. Then Joseph set out from Beersheba and his sons and carried Israel, Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives and their wagons, which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. Here are some pictures of the journey. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones, and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they also took their cattle. They also took their cattle and their goods, and they had gained in the land of Canaan and came to Egypt. And Jacob and all of his orphans were with him. And his sons with him, and his daughters, and his sons' daughters and offspring. He brought them into Egypt. Now, I promise you I won't read this. And these are the names of the descendants of Israel who came to Egypt. I'm going to skip all the way to verse 26. And all the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt with his own offspring, including Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him were 2, and all the persons of the house of Jacob that came into Egypt were 70. Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to appear before him in Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. And went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and worshipped on the neck of a good while. Here is the itinerary. It starts out in Hebron, goes to Beersheba. This is the group that's going to Egypt. Several pictures. Again, there's action, so there's a lot of things. And that is where Joseph actually meets Jacob for the first time. Then Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and will say to him, My brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, and they have been keepers of cattle, and have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. And when Pharaoh calls you and says, What is your occupation? You shall say, Your servants have been keepers of cattle from your youth, and even now, both we and our fathers and all fathers, in order that we may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now I'll stop at that point. What we're getting here now is a bit of history that was written many, many years after the events had taken place. There doesn't seem to be any question at all that the Israelites that were in Egypt were in Goshen. And what was Goshen? Let me get back here. Goshen is this part of Egypt, the delta. Why do they call it a delta, by the way? Does anybody know? It's shaped like the, what, Greek letter delta. I was wondering about a chicken and egg here. Did the letter delta get its name from the fact that the deltas had existed for a long time, or did it called a delta because it looked like? Goshen is in the eastern part of this delta. It's the closest part to Canaan, which would be up right over here. That's not too surprising. Also, this was land that apparently was not considered that valuable to the Egyptians. And so they didn't mind too much that the Israelites were to go into Goshen with all their sheep, because as far as the Egyptians were concerned, they did not like shepherds. Can anybody think of a reason why they didn't like sheep and shepherds? I could think of one. Most of the Egyptian society had been centered around what? The Nile River, where the Nile River could provide for them what? Water for their crops, water for their grain. If they're going to raise grain, the one thing they don't want around if they're raising grain is what? Sheep. Because what do sheep do? They eat the grain as soon as it's there. So it says there that the shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians. But what we find now is a situation where we find that Jacob's family is in Egypt. Do you remember that we started way back several weeks ago talking about a very interesting thing that we find in the book of Genesis? And that is that the Israelites start out with Terah and his family living where? In upper Mesopotamia. And then all of a sudden we find, because of events involving the events of the Mesopotamian Valley, the turmoil there, and because of the impending problem of an economic sort, that they were losing pasture land, that the people that we call the Israelites moved from Mesopotamia to Canaan. All right, so events on the outside forced that move. Now we run into another one. The people that were in Canaan now find themselves where? In Egypt. If you want to take a look at that book of Genesis, it's kind of an interesting thing, that one of the things that we do see is what happened to the Israelites in starting out in Mesopotamia, going to Canaan, and ending up in Egypt. Why is it so important for them to be in Egypt? Because one of the most important precepts of all of the Jewish faith is what? They were slaves in Egypt and were taken out of Egypt and brought to the promised land. So we have to start, when we get to the story of Moses, when we start to look at this, the Israelites as a nation, it starts out with them where? In Egypt. Next week we'll take a look at the last little bits that we have in the book of Genesis. Sometimes this is ascribed to Joseph, but actually it deals about as much with Jacob as it does with Joseph. And we'll finish off Genesis next week and take a quick look at the next thing that we're going to look at in this class, namely the way the Bible was put together. The reason for that is that I would like to go to the journey from Egypt to Canaan, the story of the wilderness, and take a look at how that was put together from different sources, and how we can look at what was actually written in our Old Testament and see who may have written which parts of this. Because one of the things that we find in these stories are doublets, the same story told different ways. And it's easy enough to just skip over those and not think about them, but it's kind of interesting to think that at one point somebody did take all these stories and put them together in what looks like a single story. That's it for today.
Earl?
Yes.
Could I ask a quick question? These slides that you have must be original paintings from somewhere. Where are all these paintings likely to be ours?
Oh, they're all over the world. I get them off the internet.
Yeah.
I get them with Google or with Bing. And I got a couple of key words. Very often, you can find what you're looking for by just putting the Bible verse and say images, and images that revert to that Bible verse will show up on Google, and that helps. There are many pictures I do not show. Why? They're not appropriate. Some are just cartoons. Some come from picture books. I have a few of them that are from picture books that are still rather good. But some of the great paintings deal with, like I say, certain events where there's real action that describes something that is occurring as far as biblical history is concerned.